The problem with architecture is that it's always very, very slow to adapt. You talked about bravery, and I would tell you it has nothing to do with bravery. It has to do with like common sense to start looking into these things. But sadly, the industry is not in a whole looking that much forward.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Project Flux with myself and Yoshi. Hi Yoshi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Everyone around me seems to be getting ill, but I feel fine, but I feel like I'm bound to get ill soon.
It is definitely that time of year, so I hope everyone who's listening is feeling okay, because there is a lot going about, that's for sure. But even if you were ill and bedridden, there's so much to be reading about in the world of AI. You won't get bored anyways.
What a perfect time to listen to a podcast. You can't move.
Exactly. All those episodes that you haven't got around to listening to yet. That's if anyone does get ill, that's the perfect opportunity. And we can add this week's one to that list as well, because we've got a really great conversation that we just came off with Martha Tsigkari, who's a senior partner at Fosters and Partners, a really fantastic speaker, somebody who I personally been really inspired by when I've heard her talk. And it was no disappointment to interview her either. In fact, we had to kind of cut it short because it was going on so long and we could have spoken all night.
It's because she
So,
knows so much of data, AI, and architecture. She's like an expert within all those domains. Like I've never seen such deep knowledge from that industry. Almost, it's impressive.
yeah, she's a fountain of knowledge. So we are really going to keep this kind of weekly pulse section to a minimum, because we really didn't want to cut anything she said out, because there was nothing, there was no kind of filler in there at all. So it was really, really great. We really enjoyed the conversation. We hope you all enjoy the conversation. And do let us know what you think. You know, we're getting towards the end of the year now, and what we'd really, really love is some feedback from people around what do you want to see in 2025 from Project Flux. More of the same, more interviews. Is there anyone you want us to interview? Are there any features or sections that you'd like? Just let us know. You know, now's the time that we're starting to plan and we're starting to look at where we're going to go with Project Flux next year. So just drop us a line. We're always happy to hear people's suggestions. But one of the main things that we have to do, and it's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? We have to keep up to date with the stuff that's going around in the world of AI to be able to have these discussions and to be able to write the newsletter. And it's a curse because it takes quite a lot of time to listen to and read all this stuff. But it is a blessing because it means we're always in the know. And there's nothing better, actually. We were talking, Yoshi, just the other day, that actually writing the newsletter and then having this podcast to do the weekly pulse, talk about it, is really, really beneficial. And we hope you'll get some benefit out of listening to us waffle on about the things that have happened in the world of AI. And this week is no exception. We've got a number of big stories. And the one that we really covered as the big thing is this whole notion of near infinite memory and how the large language models are starting to change and become more and more personalized and starting to understand the users more and more. And that's going to become more powerful as this memory restriction starts getting lifted. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about this story, Yoshi?
Yeah. So when you sent me this story, because I got this from you, I was quite shocked at how quickly. Not shocked because we know things are moving quickly, but it's just recognizing how fast things are moving. So it's a story from Mustafa Solomon initially, and he talks about how Microsoft are teasing or are near developing near infinity or infinite memory models, right? Imagine never having to go to ChatGPT, right, and tell it what you told it a few weeks ago. It now doesn't have that problem of memory because it remember everything. You shouldn't even really have to go to multiple chats because it can have that cross memory function a lot more seamlessly, a lot more effectively. And that is one aspect where they're unlocking memory, which has been a huge issue within AI capability, right? On the other hand, we then have Google who are developing infinite attention, or what they call infini attention.
Infinity attention, yeah.
Infini attention. And this is whereby it's not having unlimited memory, but it's saying that you can put any prompt into an LLM, no matter what the size is, even a whole book, and it will process that a lot more effectively.
So that
These,
token restriction's gone, has it, effectively?
yeah, the token restriction gone, and it kind of works off of, well, transformer models in that sense, looking at the idea that it compresses memory using key value states. So the key value state. So it's like when you look at a dictionary and you have a term, right, which is the word itself will be the key, and then you have the description beneath it, or definition, which will be the value. So what it does is these transformers can then, because they work off attention, and this is what we're talking about here, they can effectively look at the key, effectively look at that level of categorization, then look at the definition, which would be the value, and then they can then turn their attention to that and then compress that memory. So it becomes a lot more efficient in how they start to deliver capability by making a lot of information or past information compressed.
But I thought that the memory feature's been around for a while on ChatGPT. I remember us covering it on the podcast a good few months ago. So what's the difference with this?
So this is more an elevation of capability, right? So Google they also did then put memory into Gemini as well, now that we're seeing recently. But these two things are, unlimited memory from Microsoft, near infinite memory even, and then infinite attention, which is basically saying you can put any amount of information into a single prompt and it can process that effectively. So, you have restrictions when you put in long form content into these LLMs. Now you can put full books, you can probably put full project information into this. So just
Yeah.
think about it as scale. Right, think about it as it's another level of scale, and the scaling hypothesis says the more that we can scale data and everything in and around and associated with that, so training times, networks themselves, but also including memory and attention themselves, we should get a lot better at what these LLMs can achieve.
But it's the speed at which we've gone from that relatively restricted memory to this kind of infinite memory. What, 3 months, 4 months, maybe? And this kind of just mirrors what we're seeing across the AI development, is that it's moving extremely fast. You almost haven't got time to get used to one kind of mode of operation before we go on to the next one. And we are in this march towards AGI, and I think infinite memory is part of that, right?
Yeah, exactly that. So if you were to look at some of the benefits, then, so let's say you consider projects. These things can now together, take them together, right? They can then process project information in terms of all the data captured on a project. And because it's near infinite, you can then improve that, scale it to a portfolio, or a program and then portfolio. So that what that does, it means the biggest issue that LLMs have is they're inconsistent. And the inconsistency
Yeah.
comes from that inability for its attention to work in an optimized way. But now, if that attention is near infinite, it shouldn't lose that memory. It shouldn't lose that attention. So it should remember the context. It should be a lot more consistency across the board. And then because of that, it can be a lot more personalized because it's not going to forget things. So think of something which doesn't forget, right? So the information will be a lot more
A
reliable.
tortoise or an elephant.
Because of that, I guess you have less admin because you have less interruption. You've not got to correct the model as such, the LLM as such, and it can retain all that information.
So on a company perspective, or a project perspective, which is what we cover here, I'm assuming that this memory feature will it's not just a person, but it might be able to remember every part of a project or every part of a company. So all of a sudden you're building up this body of knowledge within the LLM. And that just gets more and more powerful over time, and you keep layering and layering more and more information. So let's say it's a construction project. You start off from day one when the first idea of a construction project happens, but all the way through it, you're just laying more information. It never forgets anything.
Exactly, it never forgets anything. Now, what would be a key component then, in parallel to that, is making sure that the attention is being directed in the right places. Because if you've got more information, there's more propensity to hallucinate as well. Remember, because it's overlapping information, especially if you're
Yeah, that's a
feeding
good point.
irrelevant information into the actual model itself. So that needs to also happen, and that's why there's an optimization through not just scaling memory and attention, but also working the intricacies of how you match this. And this is why key value states for transformers are really important, because that's one mechanism which is very popular at the moment, or effective at the moment.
It's cool. It's certainly happened a lot faster than I thought. But as always, we've got, if you're interested in this story, and it's Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google all looking at this, we've got a whole load of links. What we call the rabbit hole, if you really want to sort of go down that rabbit hole, we've given you the ability there. But that's the
And in
main
that as well,
story.
in that as well, James, I think we've actually linked the actual paper from Google on the Infinity Attention, and there's a great guide from someone who actually walks through, them probing into it. So the Microsoft one hasn't been released. Obviously, there's nothing under the hood in terms of what they've released. Just that Mustafa Solomon saying that they're nearing it, in terms of what they know. Confidentially, but for Google, they're implementing memory feature across to Gemini, and the Infinity Attention hasn't been released, but they've released a paper dissecting that.
Yes, this is all going to happen in 2025, it looks like,
Yeah.
right? Cool. Right, let's move our attention into projects. So we don't just cover construction, we cover projects generally. And what we're actually going to look at this time, and the reason we do that, by the way, is because there's so many parallels between the different professions or the different projects that we can draw really, really useful information about how AI is going to impact. So we don't restrict to one industry. But this time we looked at the medical industry, and there was this made the national press, actually, this one, that AI is beginning to outsmart doctors, right? So ChatGPT is starting to catch things sometimes doctors miss, and a trend is starting to happen where people are now going into the doctors with having asked ChatGPT first, or a large language model, having given the symptoms, and then giving that to the doctors, and that's now helping the doctors. And I think that's going to become more and more normal, right? I think it's going to be normal for doctors to say, and there may be a bespoke kind of model that comes out for this, but put your symptoms into this first, because it will narrow a load of stuff down. And then the one-to-one or the FaceTime with the doctor will enable you to kind of really get the most value out of the face-to-face time. But what's amazing is how these AI systems are learning. So they're trained on all the world's information, the medical textbooks. They're able to analyze millions of patients' records, and they can spot these patterns that might take humans decades to notice. And that's happening even within the kind of well-released models like ChatGPT and Claude. So I think there's a lot to be seen here for construction and other industries, from people now beginning to use this in real life environments. And this was on the BBC, this was in the New York Times, about how often ChatGPT is actually getting the diagnosis right better than the doctors, which is incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. I used to do my neuroscience masters back in the day, and we always used to look at the size of the ventricle. So when you had an MRI scan, you could see the amount of matter which had decreased, and that would tell you, if there was some form of neurodegeneration in the brain. But what was difficult to tell was that there was a lot more complexity than just that. It was almost like pixel by pixel analysis that you had to do to understand some of this diagnosis. Now, because AI has come so far, and especially with the tools which have advanced computer vision, the ability to actually detect the most minute changes within these pixels across MRI, across PET imaging and X-rays, etc., is mind-blowing. The one thing I would say is that it makes doctors lazy. because you as the person who has to put it through ChatGPT, and you can get, I guess it makes it a lot more efficient, your time with the doctor, and it helps you to narrow things down.
Well, I think it will make a bad doctor worse and a good doctor better, because we still need, there's something, we say this in the newsletter, there's something irreplaceable about doctors' intuition as well, which is really hard for an AI to replicate. But
Especially specialists.
Yeah, exactly. But, this bookending approach that we've talked about, human at the beginning, in the middle, human at the end. I think it's the same thing with this. If you've got some symptoms, rather than going to a doctor, for instance, and starting from scratch, saying, I've got these symptoms, where do I start? Having done some of that research first, because the old days would say, don't ask Dr. Google. And that's true, because every time you ask Dr. Google anything, you've got cancer, right? Or you're going to die. But this is different because, and I've used this myself, right? What this actually does, you put the symptoms in, it narrows it down and talks to you about the implications of each. So when you go and see the doctor, you say, right, these are my symptoms, and actually these are some of the thoughts that AI has come up with. And it's great because the doctor, it's already narrowed it down to a certain perspective. And then you sit there with the doctor, and they'll go, right, okay, well, that's a possibility. And they probably would have got to the same answer, but you've just, like I say, you've cut that time down where you're having that conversation, and you're getting value out of doctors. We know how under-resourced doctors are, and how little time they got, and how their appointments are put to like 5, 10, 15 minutes at most. So if you can that first 10 minutes by yourself, come to the doctors, and then spend that 50 minutes you would have had actually talking about the 2 or 3 options and what you're going to do about it, then that again is value. It's value time with a specialist. So I don't see this as replacing doctors, but I see it as augmenting, and we always talk about that. But what I'm incredibly surprised about is how this is becoming mainstream. Like, I know people, like family friends, who are doing this. It's becoming the norm. Before I go to the doctor, I'll just do this. Have you had any experience with anyone do that, Yoshi?
I've not had anyone close to me use it, but I can definitely see the utility in it. And just to add on to that, OpenAI, and I think it was Anthropic, allow you to have the ability to use an API to fine-tune image data. So these use cases become a lot more practical and feasible for a lot of other companies who are also in this space. So the barriers to entry are lower in that sense. So it's definitely something.
And it's not just doctors, right? So the same thing could apply, and I've definitely seen people do this. Let's say, you've got you're going to call a lawyer for one reason or another. Again, rather than, and we know doctors, lawyers charge by the hour, right? So if you can do some pre-research using AI first, so when you've got that meeting with a lawyer over whatever it may be, it could be a will or it could be whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is you're turning up there pre-warned, and if people are using AI for that, it's saving them money and it's saving them time. It's amazing.
Yeah, time. The only thing I would say is if you start off on the wrong foot and you have an early warning which is going the wrong way, you can set that off in that direction, and it's hard to
Yeah,
then pull back. But because we know these things are improving all the time, and like we mentioned, the benchmarks of where we're now starting to hit PhD level reasoning, and image capabilities are improving hugely in terms of computer vision. It's something which is definitely the right thing to do to save time. I think you're right, James. It'll make a
yeah.
good doctor better and a bad doctor worse. I
That's
agree.
it. It'll make a good lawyer better and a bad lawyer worse. It'll make a good surveyor better and a bad
Yeah.
surveyor worse. That's, I think, a really important point. And then, like we always say, it's not just about AI on its own. Of course, there's the whole thing around robotics. And when we go down the rabbit hole, all the links we've got to the rabbit hole in the story, there is a bit about robotic surgery. So you're combining that with robotics. It is going to be a big transformation to that medical industry over the course of the next few years. Right. Let's go on to the productivity story we had, which was around virtual replicas of human personalities. And we've been getting there with this one, haven't we? We've mentioned it a few times. Like, how does AI replicate or get anywhere close to being able to display the emotions and the way that a human personality is able to do that? But there's a story covering that, if you wouldn't mind telling us about that.
Yeah. So this story, so we spoke about agents, I think it was last week. And what's happened now is, again, a step beyond that, albeit at a very early level because it's within academia. So effectively, these researchers, or a collaboration between Stanford and Google DeepMind, have introduced this technology where you can create, like you mentioned, James, digital replicas of human personalities. So what they will do is they had 1,000 diverse, representative sample of people, and they gave them effectively a therapy session, like a counseling session. So 2 hours, they learned about that through an interview. They learned about that person's life, their childhood memories, their personalities, their political views, etc., etc. And they then developed what they would call simulation agents. Now, these simulation agents then could effectively learn the personality of that digital twin of that person that it was learning from, right? And they then tested this, using numerous assessment methods, and they found there was an 85% similarity rate compared to their human
Wow,
counterparts, right?
that's
And
mad.
just to add, frame that a bit more and be more specific, that was mapped across the big five personality traits, right? So neuroticism, conscientiousness, openness to new experiences, extroversion, and agreeableness. So across those five, you could shape personality and emulate. Now, there is the question that this is not actually emotion, it's not personality, it's effectively biomimicry. It is, again, learning human patterns and data and then mimicking that effectively, right? That's typically what these
Mm.
models do. But take it hand in hand with what we mentioned in the previous story about infinite attention or an infinite memory.
Mm.
You could effectively put all of someone's memories and experiences into a AI model. And if that's near infinite, you can then start to develop a real person. So this is what I say about scale is really important now.
Or I guess you could start replicating people who pass away. I mean, we get into really
Yes,
scary sci-fi
like
areas
Black,
there,
like Black
like
Mirror, right?
yeah, exactly, bringing people back from the dead. It's all getting really Black Mirror.
Yeah, so I was looking at this from a project perspective, and I thought, if you're able to profile certain job roles, you can, let's say you were to profile a project manager, and one key aspect within a project manager's personality should typically be that they strive for control, right? Because you have to control a project. So you have to control many moving parts. Now that is part of your personality. If you can interweave that within an AI agent, you can then start to simulate, and you can do that across other roles. You can then start to simulate projects, right? Introducing human elements into it. So this was the bit that I was really interested. But I was shocked that I overlooked the bit which is probably core to my education. And it is that these researchers are actually using these simulation agents for research themselves. So they'd develop a bunch of simulation agents which represent a certain sample of demographic, or in the population, and then they can then conduct social science or psychological experiments on these simulation agents, and you can expect those simulation agents to then respond as a human would. So you're starting to drive psychological research, but rather than spending all this money on experimental design and getting participants in, you're just using the AI simulation agents because they're representative of
Just
that.
creating these different personas. Yeah, okay.
Right. So social science experiments can become a lot cheaper. You can do a lot more much more richer experimental designs. You can run different simulations. You can do different alternative methods, and you can trial it. So it's a step in the right direction. And again, it lends to what you were saying. It's making things more efficient, time effective, cost effective.
When you take it into a project perspective, it's again, if you've got a project and you need to do some sort of research on it, you don't have to bring people. Let's say your project is developing a new product, and part of that is market research into that
Yeah,
product, where you have to go and
exactly.
hire a load of people. Yeah, not anymore. You could just get these personas that have been
Yeah.
pre-trained on, one person's a moody person, one person's a happy person,
And even
and see what
R&D.
they say. Yeah,
So let's say you
and
put in a
R&D,
product,
definitely R&D,
you can
massively
get
for
people to
R&D.
then test your product out, and then you can get them to give you feedback. Now, looking on the flip side to this, going into or delving into emotion and personality, anything which is associated with human essence, right, is always a tricky area, right, because it opens the door to a lot of ethical concerns. So some of those ethical considerations would be that you're able to then manipulate behaviors based on an individual's without their consent, for instance, right? Because you're then assuming, and then you can kind of do things like for like, and that's one concern, especially when you introduce deepfake technology. There's a risk of potential misuse, impersonation, unauthorized representation, all these different things. So that's one concern, okay, and it's a bit of a grey area. The second concern that I found really interesting was the legality in relation to intellectual property rights. Because who is it who actually owns these simulation agents? Is it the person whose personality has been mirrored? Or is it the person who was created? Is it the person who's created the AI technology? Who owns it?
An ethical question right there. It's
Right?
probably both, isn't it? I mean, it's taken something from one person, but someone else has spent the time programming it, training it. So it's probably a combination of both. But that gets really
So if I said
cool.
to you, James, I've just created you as an AI simulation agent, and it can do, a lot of things that you do, your same personality. In fact, I might start to get it to make music. How would you feel?
Well, I'd hope it does a better job than me. I thought I might sort of retire and let it go on. There's a lot of plus points there. You could take all the weaknesses of me, which are many, and try and take those out. In fact, my
But
wife
that
would be
opens,
quite
that
happy.
opens the door to other
A
questions
version
like,
of me that listens, she'll say, will be quite useful.
yeah, but it will open the door to other philosophical questions like the sense of self. Like, how do you see yourself? How do you see yourself? And also looking at this better version of you where I've managed to remove the weaknesses.
You know what? I don't think that's far away. I think we'll be getting to that point where we'll be able to create these versions of ourselves to go, because it's already there. You can create your avatar, right? I've created a version of myself that you can put on video, and it's very, very, very lifelike. It'd be very difficult to tell the difference. So why not? Why not sort of replicate your personality and let your personality go and do that task, and you fine
And this is
tune
the
it for your
future.
faults?
But this is the
Yeah,
future, right? So it's basically, imagine having like 1,000 James running around doing every errand you need. So
I
you
know.
go into a Teams call, you can put the camera on if you use that sort of technology. So let's say your camera's off. You're then in one call, you emulated your voice, your personality. You're doing the work there. That's one full agent deployed. You're then doing other stuff.
I'd be quite worried about 1,000 Yoshis roaming the world.
But this is the territory we're stepping into, right? Obviously, there's limitations around hardware and computing all these different things, but it shows you the possibility, which isn't that far off the horizon.
Yeah, and I suppose bringing it back to seriousness for a minute in terms of projects and how we do projects, we know we need teams work better with different personalities. No team works well if everyone's got the same personality. So let's say you've got a team and it's missing a certain type of personality. You can now create that to put it into the team to balance the overall team dynamics, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, this is all early research. I mean, the paper itself was strictly used for research and development in that space, so it is still far off. But it just shows you what's capable in the future, and people are in this direction. And again, it's
Yeah.
Google.
Well,
Google, I give them their props. When it comes to a lot of the baseline technologies and innovation, they do drive a lot of it. I mean, Transformers came from Google, right? I think.
yeah. Well, the whole DeepMind came from Google.
Yeah,
This
this is
this
DeepMind.
whole.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, absolutely. You always get a lot. I do love our chats because I walk away just with head exploding, and I hope we haven't made the listeners' heads hurt too much. But we really do have to think about these things because even though when we say a while off, that whole notion of what a while means, going back to the memory story, that's changed as well. But we probably mean months now rather than years.
Yeah. But you take these things on an extreme. So in the newsletter, there's one article that we don't actually cover in this, but in Switzerland, there's a church which is
Yeah,
unveiled.
the Jesus AI.
You've got a faith advisor asking theological questions. They're responding
But
to
why
those.
not? Why not? Why not? What everything we speak about here. What if you can create a personality? Why not create a pastor or a priest or a rabbi, whatever it may be? Why not? It's exactly the same principles, isn't it? But it does send you down a rabbit hole. We are kind of running out of time because we must move on to the fantastic conversation with Martha. Just very quickly, some other stories that we covered. There was a big one. There's so much happening. We didn't even get around to this one, which is massive as well, about the quantum computer revolution, because the quantum drive is going to be what creates that exponential
Yes.
growth in compute, which is going to get rid of a lot of the barriers that we currently got. So they think that quantum computers are going to be commercially available by early 2025. Whether that's true or not, that's the Microsoft and Atom Computing. We haven't got we just haven't got time to go through that in too much detail, but it's all there in the newsletter. We also cover in the newsletter around some of the events that we've had this past week, particularly London Build. London Build had an AI and digital construction stage, which was awesome. I was lucky enough to be on one of the panels with some other fantastic people from the industry. So we write about that. We also talk about our book of the week, which is a guide by the Harvard Business Review, which is called Welcome to AI, a Human Guide to Artificial Intelligence, which we thoroughly recommend. And then some of our podcasts. So podcast this week to look out for: Sam Altman on how to build the future, Andrew NG on the rise of agents and agentic reasoning, our very own Project Flux podcast. So last week's episode where you and I just had a good old chat about all the developments. And then our great friends at Gen AI podcast, that's Del Fung and the guys from Nodes and Link. All the links are there in the newsletter, so do check it out. But unless you've got anything else to cover, Yoshi, I think we'll move on to the discussion with Martha.
Yeah, let's do it.
Good stuff. We'll see you all next week.
Project Flux is here.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Project Flux podcast with myself and Yoshi. It's really great to have you here. Today we are very lucky to have Martha Tsigkari from Fosters and Partners. She is the senior partner and head of applied research and development, and we're really, really lucky to have her on the show. I think I met you, Martha, probably about a year ago at an event, didn't I? And we really hit it off.
A little bit more than that, yes, indeed.
Was it that long? I don't know where time's going at the moment, but I'm glad we finally got you on the podcast. Before we start, can you just sort of share your journey into architecture and how you became involved with AI?
Right. So I had a very, very traditional architectural background. I finished in a very traditional architectural school back in Thessaloniki in Greece. And
Yeah.
I was working for 6 years with my dad, who's a civil engineer, in an office of two,
Okay.
using the predecessor of BIM in 1999, called Architectural Desktop, the predecessor of Revit. And I did that enough to realize with my dad that maybe I need to be doing a little bit more technology. And I did a master's of computer science in the Bartlett at UCL, called at the time Adaptive Architectural Computation. Before I finished, I was very lucky to be hired at Foster and Partners. And now I'm leading the applied R&D group here after 18 years. It's been a long journey.
But you saw the vision, so all the way back in like the late 90s, you could see how, the fact that you took on a computer science master's, you must have joined the dots at some point and realised where things were going.
I think I was very interested in technology, and my father, albeit running a very traditional engineering practice, used to do everything with a computer since the early 90s.
Why?
And so I remember I was doing the first planning applications for him in Claris, in a Macintosh screen yay big.
Wow.
So, I mean, we were always discussing the potential of reinvention of the profession through technology. And although traditional architecture has the greatest respect for, I just needed to understand, how can we push the boundaries? I really like going outside my comfort zone, and technological advancements really give you that possibility to explore and find new things and fail, but also create possibilities that were not possible without it. So that's how I came into this. That's why we have been looking into AI since late 2017, 2018 in the office.
Well, that's funny you should say that, because that was about the time that I had my first experience with AI within my discipline, which was quantity surveying. But did you find at that point it was almost a bit too early? People were looking at you like it was really hard to convince people that this was the way it was going. Obviously
But
now it's all the hype.
that's the story of my life. People look at me work all the time. So this was no different, which is fine. I was very lucky because I'm also an associate professor at UCL, and I ended up teaching at the same masters that I have done. And my then mentor, the late and great Alastair Turner, was an intersection between computer scientist, sort of architect, and philosopher. And so a lot of the notions of what could be were things that we were discussing with him back in like 2005. And so when I was teaching in the course and when he was teaching us, and I took over some of his modules, we did neural networks back in the day using processing, and that's 2005. And so I had into the curriculum, I continued his modules. I had in the curriculum supervised and unsupervised learning that we start doing with processing and then in C# directly into Grasshopper. So we knew about these notions, and then suddenly we've seen things like deep learning and pix-to-pix coming at the front. And at the time, within the computer science cycles, it was all the rage. Can do amazing things. So it got me thinking, okay, what can we do with these tools? Clearly, there is a lot of things that we can start investigating through technologies like that, and they're not straightforward. So the first thing we start looking was collaborating with Epanos Michalatos, who at the time was working for Autodesk, and we
Okay.
did together research to understand how passively actuated materials can perform under different thermal situations, and they were materials that were laminates that were layered. And depending on the layering, you had a different deformation. And we were thinking, okay, what happens if you have a facade and you want a particular deformation based on a particular thermal load? In order to find that, you need to go through trial and error thousands of times through nonlinear analysis to understand how you can get close to the layering you need to get the final result. And so we reverse engineer the process, and we use at the time through pix-to-pix machine learning, we try to understand how we can train a system through the models to basically predict the layering. So we were having different layers, different outputs, a set of thousands of images, and train the system to do that. And through that, after that, we jumped into surrogate modeling with similar situation, understanding, okay, you have analysis are images, you can have the start point and the conditions on the end point, and can you start understanding how you can create surrogate model that can negotiate speed with accuracy. So we looked into spatial and visual connectivity, which were not necessarily contextualized based on other kind of inputs, but only to do with the floor plate you're looking at. And little by little, we start experimenting with different ideas of what this technology can do. That is not purely on Gen AI, which we all obviously are looking into as well, but it has to do with automation and augmentation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the misconception, isn't it? That, because everyone's talking about Gen AI because it's the big buzzword, but actually a lot of the machine learning and the neural networks have been around for a long, long time. And it's so interesting that and you use the word there, experimenting. I think that's so important, to have the license to experiment. Unfortunately, in the industry, a lot of people aren't very good at experimenting. So the fact that you were given the opportunity within Fosters and Partners, because it's very forward thinking, is fantastic. And I suppose, is there a little bit of "I told you so" that you think when you see all the hype now? I don't know if you get a little bit of that.
No, I don't care about that. I only care that we do the best work possible all the time, and I don't care to say to people, "Oh, look, we told you that this is going to happen." What I'm interested in for us to be doing it when other people are just kind
Yeah,
of getting into it, and that
yeah,
has happened.
yeah,
I think overall, it is incredible to be in a company like Foster and Partners where you get these opportunities, but you also need to remember that you have to create these opportunities. And I think anybody can create these opportunities in any size of company, as long as they have a thirst to break the mold and do something differently. It requires some knowledge, but it doesn't require huge resources to explore some of these things. And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
what we've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that bravery to have a go and sort of bring something to the more senior people and say, well, look at this. And that's what we try and encourage as well, is, experiment. Don't be afraid to give something a go. And that's really how I got involved in this, by experiment. It was actually at Imperial College that I met someone who we're going to get on the podcast soon, actually, a Professor Peter Chung, who said, oh, look, why are you doing things this way? Why don't you take a couple of my undergraduates doing computer science and see what they can do? And it was amazing what they were able to come up with. You kind of started touching on it, but my next question was going to be around, the integration of AI and machine learning has transformed the design process at Fosters and Partners.
Well, the transformation is going to be very slow for us and for everybody. First thing to say is that this technology is not new. This technology is 70, 80 years old.
Yeah,
There are particular reasons why we see this huge third spring of AI and machine learning, and that is, according to me, because of the computational power we have nowadays, the rate of adoption that is incredible, as well as the inordinate amount of data. So through that, you start having a little by little understanding of how these technologies can reshape what we do, not just in architecture, but everywhere. The problem with architecture is that it's always very, very slow to adapt. You talked about bravery, and I would tell you it has nothing to do with bravery. It has to do with like common sense to just start looking into these things. But sadly, the industry is not in a whole looking that much forward. There are so many different players. It's such a complicated game to play architecture that it's very hard to move all these parts together to the next stage. And so we ended up looking into different applications at the office that try to take advantage of the power of machine learning and AI for particular business cases. We're not jumping into the Gen AI, which is like, for me, a tip of a huge iceberg. And actually, the way people are using it right now is more like not a redefining of architecture, but more of like removing ourselves of the creative equation. So for us, we're like, what are the business cases? LLMs, for example, are incredible when it comes to knowledge dissemination. And we create our own LLM-based search and ask engine where we can interrogate our design guides. We start now interrogating materials in buildings. We start interrogating 2D drawings and getting back very straightforward and clear answers.
So just on that, those design guides that you created, are those like fine-tuned large language models that you created within Fosters?
So the design guides are documents that the office have been developing for 50 years, and it's part of their proprietary, have very high IP value, and a very deep knowledge around the design process. There are a lot of them, and up until point, people would have to go and search the guides PDF by PDF to find things that they wanted. What we created was an application that is, initially, it was actually done in Elasticsearch, so that's prior to, and then
Well ahead of the game.
Then we were developing it to use large language models on the back end so that we create an interface where people can start asking questions. what is the best insulation for a commercial building? And then directly they will get an answer, or rather a sequence of answers with a level of security that the system has of how relevant they are, and also exactly when that answer is being found in the guide, so that you can see it in context with everything else. So the system has been kind of trained in a way to not at all improvise, but show exactly what is on the guide, because you don't
Yeah.
want to start improvising in this case.
No hallucinations then.
Well, not in our case, not in this particular application.
Yeah, excellent. That's some great examples. And could
And
you?
so this have now we extended because the backend is exactly the same, and you can change now the data sets, right? And you can train it with different data sets. So now we start training with images, where you can open an image, you can select a material, and it can directly relate it to our materials research center in our library and tell you what material it
Wow,
is. We start looking into drawings, so you can start asking for particular drawings. We've been through a process of indexing our drawings, trying to understand how we can extract different parts of information through them and directly. So if you want to require a design detail for a particular type of cladding, you can start looking examples of what has come before, rather than trying to reinvent it or find the one person who knows how to do it in like the 2,500 people in the office.
well, that's the beauty, isn't it? It's getting all that knowledge throughout the business so that everyone's got access to it, and that's really improves efficiency and productivity. But do you have an example of where AI, you could say, that's actually significantly influenced the design outcome, i.e. you wouldn't have come to that design outcome if you had done it the traditional way?
I mean, not yet. We have developed an AI portal through which people can actually do ideation, but we have developed mostly in order for people to be able to model in Rhino. And through an ML inference API in Rhino, we are able to take that model and directly turn it into an image for ideation purposes. And then you can do full ideation on the back end of the portal using things like Flux or Fluxional and SDXL, etc. But these are still on ideation stage, right? Because my view is that we have some of the best designers in the world, and I say that in all modesty. And every architectural office should be proud of the designers they have. So I don't think our scope should be to replace our designers with a different creative tool. Our scope should be to augment their creativity by giving them tools that can help them do things better and faster,
Love that. I love
rather
that.
than allow the computer to imagine something for them and us trying to painstakingly replicate it. I don't think that's fun or fair for our
No,
designers.
and you're right, Foster's Partners, definitely, you're up there as one of the top architects. And I suppose the slight difference between talking to an architect, particularly somebody like yourself from Foster's Partners, and maybe, other people we have on the show who are maybe surveyors or engineers, is that, architecture is an art as well. And it reminds me a lot of the conversation I've had with people we've had on the show who are graphic designers, for instance, where they say exactly the same as you. This shouldn't be about replacing the creativity. It should be about augmenting and speeding up and getting rid of a lot of the boring grunt things that you have to do to get to the creative stuff.
I think, look, the reality is, what I think is going to happen is that we're going to see a huge, if the advancement of this technology continues in that exponential curve, we're going to see a lot of discussions coming along that will have to do with what creativity is, who the creator is, and who has ownership of things that are being created. And through these discussions, we will start kind of re-engaging with the notion of conscience, even, I feel, in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Through that journey, it's up to us to understand that because these discussions are going to happen, we need to start thinking of what is the value that we add in the final product. What is the added value that an architect has when automation augmentation may replace in the future through AI agents and ML software 80% of what we do? What is the value that you bring as a creator when you may have a commoditization of whatever expertise, domain expertise you may have, because these AI systems will create the equivalent of Uber for black drivers for architects, right? When you start thinking around these terms, you start understanding that this is a much deeper conversation that we need to have first and foremost with ourselves and what we think our values should be. And as such, I think we should see it as a possibility to reinvent ourselves. In the same way, I give always the example of how art reinvented themselves after the advent of photography. And
Yeah,
everybody thought that
absolutely.
art is going to die, but instead it kind of spun off into all these different media just
Yeah.
because it didn't have to particularly design something in a photographic manner
And
anymore.
the same with music, right? When rock and roll came along, everyone said that's the death of music, and of course, it just creates a different art form.
I think we are very flawed as human beings, but we also have an incredible ability to reinvent ourselves. And I think maybe these discussions will help us dig a little bit deeper on what it means to be creative and what it means to be even human.
It definitely will. So, Yosh, I think you had a question next.
Yeah, Martha, following on from what you've mentioned then, when AI or if AI becomes commonplace in organizations, what do you think will be the separating factor from architecture firms in design, differentiating Foster's from other organizations?
I think this comes back to this notion of value, and I think it's going to be what is the creativity that you bring on the table? How is your design different than a mainstream product that comes out of any single software that can exist out there that can create it? How does your interaction with the client, with the needs of the project, with notions like sustainability and different that come into play, how does your knowledge allow all of this to shape the project in a very particular way that allows for understanding and interaction of the needs of the client and the project? And I don't really have a very straightforward answer, but I think that this is the route that we should be following. I think a lot of architecture may become quite productized in the sense that you're going to have more of a modularity, vertically integrated processes that produce one particular thing through a kit of parts. That is not necessarily a very bad thing for everything. If you see some of the buildings out there, I think a lot of them would benefit from such a process, if I'm being honest. But then if you want something slightly different, something more bespoke, something more driven based on the needs and the creative interactions between what we all want to see as a better, newer build experience in our environment, that's where your value would be as a designer, as an architect,
Because
as a
there's
creative.
because there's an argument that in terms of scaling AI capability, one of the challenges there is that we don't have enough data, and in time there won't be enough data or human data to actually train these models. So one of the avenues is to create synthetic data and use AI to create synthetic data. So do you think that will have an impact on the architectural industry in terms of creating synthetic data, in terms of from a design perspective?
I think, if I'm being honest, the industry has an inordinate amount of data, but it has this data very badly stored
Exactly.
and tagged, understood. So it's not that we don't have the data, it's that we have it all over the place. Not we as an industry, I mean. We have it all over the place. We don't have standards against that data. We cannot basically put tags and say this building scores in sustainability that well, has like this structural system that performs that well, is in the scale of 0 to 10, that's how socially acceptable it is or appropriate it is, etc. And so we don't have benchmarks. We have not created benchmarks for ourselves. So even if we get all our data and somehow use that data, it's not benchmarked enough for us to be able to use it appropriately. We have seen that problem. We have used synthetic data sets ourselves. I think with the developments that I see within this domain, a lot of the tagging that we currently have to do will be done automatically by systems with very little training from us.
Wow.
And this is where some of these models will lead in the future. But I see a bigger problem in that we are already using these systems to produce more and more synthetic data of bad quality. The problem with the systems is that if you have bad data in, you get bad data out. It's garbage in, garbage out. So in this sense, you end up having a situation where you are inferring new data sets that are going back into the training process and keep training this model. So you have bad data in and bad data out, and then you have a degeneration of the data sets. And at some point, you just have only bad things coming out.
And that
And
poses
that's,
a risk for AI in terms of AI credibility within the architectural
I
space.
think it's a risk everywhere, but as long as you understand that that's a risk, you can start building strategies to avoid it as much as you can. And avoid that kind of flattening of everything looking the same, of everything having bad kind of biases embedded in them. I think we have unconscious biases embedded in architecture that we don't understand that we have. For other industries, you have biases, for example, in HR. It has been known they have used AI systems in HR companies around the world that were biased towards men. They use systems in the judiciary in the US that were biased against people of color, right? These are known facts. But in architecture, I can tell you I'm a relatively small person. I'm 156, right? Architecture is not made for people with size. If you go to any hotel, all the editions are different. Like some public spaces are designed in such a way that are not made for women to feel safe to walk at night.
Yeah,
These are not things that you're thinking about when you're designing most of the times, right? But they exist, they're true. And so
absolutely.
all these embedded biases, or if you think about how we build, for example, for inclusivity, or rather lack of it in many cases, how we do things that are not facilitating people who are blind or like visually impaired or deaf to move around. All these things are really embedded in our data sets, but we don't know about because we don't think about them that much.
Yeah,
So can you
like that
give some
And
insight
these
unconscious
are,
bias.
in terms of how fosters are approaching that potential challenge then?
we have started like building different applications, for example, with VR, particularly for visual impairment,
Wow.
to understand how visually impaired people perceive different spaces and how it can help us in the design process. We have a certain department directly within our design technology group that looks into inclusivity around all different areas and how this can be enhanced through design reviews of what we do. And so we just try to lead by example, by upping the quality of what we're doing, taking into consideration these things, and hopefully, if your design culture and output is of that level, then if that data trains your systems, then it will be of that good level as well. But just knowing it, just accepting that these things exist and trying to fix them, I think, is the first and most difficult step.
Yeah. And just like you say, being honest with yourself and ourselves as an industry, that there are some inherent biases and you're not always sure it's there. But actually, AI is an opportunity to deal with those. If you like, make sure you're getting feedback and you're building that feedback into the model, and you say to yourself, we know we're not perfect yet, then actually it can be a positive thing. I just wanted to move on to ethics, because we can't have a conversation about AI without talking about the ethical
No,
considerations. So I was always going to bring that up, but it is growing, AI within the industry, within architecture, within surveying, within construction. So what are the ethical considerations that particularly architects should keep in mind?
I think there are a lot of issues. I mean, first and foremost, the quality of data. I think there's an ethical responsibility there towards everybody that we create spaces for. I think ethically, you need to start thinking about ownership, IP, and copyright as well. And these are interesting discussions that are already being had within the creative spaces with visualizers and actors and writers, etc. There are very interesting discussions that are being had in this domain, and a lot of them kind of expand more into the ethical responsibility that AI may have, or that this sort of tools may have, and how it's better kind of distributed across people. I think we need to be very conscious again about our data. A lot of these kind of
Yes.
problems derive from the data we have and the way we use the systems, and the way that we don't understand them. And that is going to create more and more problems. The more people are willing to just scratch the surface of what these technologies can do, the more problematic this is going to become in the long term.
And that's what scares me about these these LLMs and neural networks, is that it's not a database. And we don't actually know sometimes what's happening behind the scenes. And as they grow stronger and stronger and more powerful, we're going to lose that connection to what's actually going on under the hood.
I mean, to be honest, this is already happening, and we didn't need AI for this to happen. Look at social media and look how through social media you can have the propagation of lies that not even anybody knows they're lies, right? You can have the propagation of anything as long as you're like in the right social media bubble.
Yeah.
We don't need AI to like do the wrong thing. What this is going to do is help us do the wrong thing easier. I mean, I can see a situation in the future where people are relying so much on these technologies that they lose all sense of domain expertise, and something like or the equivalent of ChatGPT becomes the fundamental truth. As you know, our grandmothers used to say, "Oh, I've seen it on the TV, so must be true." People are going to say, "I typed a question into ChatGPT, it told me that, so it must be true because I don't have the domain knowledge to judge whether that's true or not."
Yeah, that's already happening.
And exactly, and this is already happening without the help of AI. So I think we need to fundamentally be a bit more introspective in our human nature in why these things happen the way they do, rather than whether the technology is to fault for these failures.
So that means there's a lot of emphasis on humans, to prevent them becoming cognitive misers in that sense. So how do you think the profession itself can ensure that AI augments rather than replaces human creativity?
I think that first and foremost is for us to understand where can AI help our process and therefore start building business cases around it. It's like, if you see a knife on the road, what can you do with it, right? Somebody can go and do something really bad with it, and somebody can take it and peel an apple. Uh, you need to think, if you have a tool, what are you going to use it for, and what is the result, or what the result of that action will be. I think most people do not think of the use case, do not think of augmentation or automation. They just think of, oh, this is a shiny new thing, I have to try it. And this has been a recipe for disaster for humanity for as long as I know. And that's why I'm saying it's just fundamentally, as long as you start to take a step back and say, okay, what is this technology doing? In principle, what are a lot of in depth the things that it can do, not just what I see like on the news. Based on the things that I think I can understand about this technology, how can I use it within the process? Where does my process have gaps and problems that can be you can have some quick fix? Where do I need some more robust fixes, and therefore that technology needs to be integrated in a more intense way? And how can I do that in order to have the technology serve me rather than the other way around?
Mhm.
Right. So it's a bit like AI, you need to lead AI, not be led by AI itself.
Yeah, I mean, we can start. I don't want to end up like saying platitudes, right? But I think some of these things are common sense. You just need to like employ your logic. It's not rocket science. Literally, it's not. It's like simple common sense. You have a business. You want your business to go on for the next 30 years. There is this technological advancement that is coming. You can either be a Luddite and kind of slowly fade away. You can use it to destruction, or you can be somewhere in the middle and say, this is great for X, Y, and Z. Let me see how I can take advantage of that this way and make a long-term plan. And that's why I think rational people are doing.
What a soundbite that is. I knew we'd get some good soundbites out of Martha today, because that kind of sums it up so nicely. And it does often come down to just common sense. And this is what I start saying to people. This is just a new technology. And the technology comes around all the time, but the same principles apply to the way that you use it. We always end with a devil's advocate question, Martha. So the one thing I wanted to ask you was, there's an argument, and I guess from other architects, that AI could lead to the homogenization of design, reducing the uniqueness. So how do you respond to those concerns that AI might stifle creativity rather than enhance it?
I think this is an absolutely valid concern. And I think this may be a probable future. And based on how I see people are using it, it is possible and quite probable.
Mm.
Now, the only thing that could save us from this route is the slowness by which we tend to adapt to like new technologies.
That becomes our advantage. We're
Yeah,
so slow. We're not going to let it.
yeah, but I think that is also a danger, because okay, so just to take a step back and say, I'm not Pythia, I don't see the future, and if I could foresee things, I would be very rich right now, because certainly I would mute the lotto numbers. So anything
Yeah.
I say, take it with a piece of salt, because it might be something completely different in a year's time based on the development of these technologies. But if things continue the way that they do, I can foresee that a lot of the things that we do are not going to happen necessarily by architects, right? You will see people from outside the industry jumping into the opportunity that these technological advancements bring to create applications similar to what IKEA did for like doing
Yeah.
kitchens. You go to create a kitchen in IKEA, you don't have to be a designer, right? You have a set of parts, they have their supply chain based where you are, you say, I want this, this, and this, I will reconfigure it like that, there it is, your kitchen, somebody comes and puts it together. You can have the same thing with the house. You can have like a software company coming and saying, well, what Katera tried to do very unsuccessfully, because they were trying to do it everything and they didn't realize they're actually creating one product and they should minimize rather than expand. But if you try to create one product, you can say, okay, this is my one product, this is my kit of parts, this is my supply chain, this is my vertically integrated process, and it's only customized for this country. So come on, Mr. Developer, go into my app, create this, and I will bring you your house much cheaper, much faster. This can now today happen for 20 and 30-story buildings. So why not happen for like one single house for a family? So a lot of these things, I feel that if things continue like that, we will have people from outside architecture jumping into the opportunity as technologists to create these sort of things as software and apps for people to use. You could even see big software vendors who already have the know-how and the data from their clients to be able to offer a service like that in the future. I don't think, again, this is impossible. I think it's very probable. So,
How would
again,
someone like maybe Foster's react to that? I mean, you've got the brand, right? So is there a possibility, and I'm thinking way ahead now, but is there a possibility that one day Foster's could license that kind of model to other people they can use? They could have a Foster's inspired design where you've trained a model based on Foster's principles and there's a license to go with that.
with what I know now and with my 18 years of experience in the company, I think this is very improbable. I don't think we want or need to do something like that. And I actually think that what really makes us Foster and Partners is the attention to detail and the fact that there is an inordinate amount of complexity behind our buildings, but our buildings do not look complex, they look effortless. And that is a level of design expertise and culture that only comes after 55 years. So that's not something that you can necessarily commoditize as a service that you give to somebody to create. We're not creating images, we're creating living spaces, we're creating experiences. And I don't think that's as easily replicatable. And so based on that knowledge, I don't think that future is a very probable.
That gives some comfort then, and I think that's like you say, there's the aesthetic side of it, but it's the other side, the living side of it, that is probably harder to replicate. So one last question for me: how much do you worry about the likes of Autodesk and firms like that being able to? They're obviously sucking up an enormous amount of data, and most architects use them. Are they a
Well,
threat?
I told you what, I mean, look, everybody who has that amount of data and they're not kind of constrained by anything else rather than by ethical considerations to use it are a potential threat. That's a fact. It's not just about Autodesk, it's about everybody who finds themselves in that position. Also, everybody who finds themselves in a position of a monopoly can also be a threat. When your entire pipeline, your deployment of anything depends on one single software, and that is what you have trained all your people against, and that's the only thing that you deliver, the sway that whatever software company has against you, and especially if it has flooded the market, it's incredible and it's incredibly powerful. That is not just about Autodesk, that's the reality of life when it comes to systems. That's how it goes. Now, I think that companies like Autodesk have incredible things to offer because they have a lot of different research threads and they have some really fantastic people working there. I think it's up to us of how we tailor this idea of how we use the systems better and how we do not necessarily only focus on one particular platform, but we can actually incorporate whatever does the job better I think that if anything, these new technologies are going to facilitate
Mhm.
with the rise of AI agents and this API first approach that most software adhere to nowadays. You could see the stringing of operations into pipelines automatically on the background through AI without you having to do anything, as long as you have the right software suites to do it. So I think as much as big companies have the capability of doing, let's say, swallowing the entire market, in the same way, I feel that they do also understand that there are a lot of possible futures where these developments may be working against them. And I think they are also adhering to incorporating some of these strategies that may end up helping us all. So I don't want to say, I don't want to go through this kind of thing that everybody says, oh, I don't want Autodesk, oh, I don't want this, oh, they're going to be as right. They can be, they may not be. It all depends on how we all decide to manage the process and the market.
Yeah, there's a place for them, isn't there? And I think, you know, all of us have got the responsibility to just monitor the situation, and we are still in control of our own destiny in that sense.
I mean, look, there is a reality. There is a reality about having so much data and having no constraints to use it if you wanted to. And that reality is obvious with things like how OpenAI has been using kind of data from the internet, they're training, and they start now having different deals with news providers, with creatives, etc. This is possible. This can happen to us. Now, if we know that this may happen, it's up to us to shape the discussion accordingly. And I think Autodesk is also in that position, and they also understand that they need to shape the discussion appropriately. So it's all about not knowing, but potentially thinking ahead of what may happen and try to take the right preemptive action early on, rather than trying to do corrective maneuvers when everything's said and done and you don't have much room. Yeah, exactly. Much room to change.
And really, that's why we do this show, is because it's all about knowledge. You can't make those decisions unless you know what's going on. And I think we are fortunate in some senses that it's early in the industry, you know, early days still in terms of adopting this technology, but that gives us the chance to shape it. Martha, thank you so much. We always let our guests have the final word. If there's anything else you want to say, or any comments you want to make.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I would like to say thank you so very much for inviting me. It's always such a pleasure speaking to you, James. You are like really, and Yoshi, I haven't spoken so much with Yoshi, but every time I speak with you, James, I find the sort of like, it's when you speak with someone, you're like, yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's nice it's nice sometimes to like hear your opinions kind of bounce back to you and to agree that action needs to be taken. And I think what you're doing, both of you, is really incredible to like raise awareness in the industry and help people understand that change is not something that is unreachable. It's very, very possible for everybody. And we just need to take some very thought of steps in order to be where we need to be. And so thank you very much, and congratulations on like doing this for the industry.
No, thank you. When we first met, I really did feel like we were kindred spirits because we were going through similar challenges, and it's good to have someone to bounce those things off. And it would be really wonderful if you could come on to the show again, maybe in a few months at some point next year, and let us know, because things are moving so fast, aren't they?
When robots will have overtaken the world? Yes, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm very, very polite with Alexa all the time, and despite the fact that she does none of the things I ask her, I think that when the revolution comes, she will remember that I have been always saying please and thank you.
You do the same, you always think.
I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly, it's coming. It's coming. We need to be what we were saying about preemptive action. That's exactly that.
Exactly.
Perfect example. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Martha. Really appreciate your time, and we'll catch up again with you very soon.
Absolutely. Have a lovely night.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go on to the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.
See you later, everyone.